She found a dog in the woods, but his collar held a secret worth millions. Every child at Riverbend learned the same rule: don't be seen, don't be heard, don't expect love. Emily Carter lived by it, her days measured in watery soup and locked closets. But she also had a secret, an escape route into the forest, her only refuge from the cruelty of Agnes Moore, the orphanage director. That was where she first heard it, a sound too soft for most to notice, yet impossible for Emily to ignore. A whimper, a cry, something calling to her from the shadows of Devil's Peak. She followed the sound, heart pounding, and there, tied to an ancient oak, was a German shepherd near death. His ribs pressed sharp against his skin, his paws raw where the rope cut into them. And yet, when Emily dropped to her knees, he looked at her with eyes that still held hope. She fed him the crust of bread she'd hidden for a smaller child, and in return, he gave her something no one else ever had: trust. But hidden beneath his fur was a chip, a secret that tied him to a man with more power than she could imagine, and to a family Emily thought she had lost forever. The Riverbend orphanage did not sit so much as slump at the edge of town, its walls sagging under decades of rain and neglect. Once, long ago, it had been a farmhouse with red paint and wide porches. Now the red had faded into something closer to rust, and the porches leaned like broken ribs. The sign above the front gate read, "Riverbend Home for Children," though the letters had peeled so badly that it might as well have said, "Riverbend for Nobody." Inside those walls, Emily Carter moved like a shadow. She was 8 years old, but looked younger, her small frame the result of meals that never filled, and punishments that often lasted longer than they should. Hunger was not an occasional ache here. It was a constant companion, gnawing at the edges of her ribs like rats in the walls. The children learned quickly not to complain. If they did, the watery soup got thinner and the bread got harder. Complaining meant punishment, and in Riverbend, punishments came in many forms. Long hours locked in the storage closet with only the dark for company, or kneeling on rice in the hallway until knees went raw. Emily had already learned the rule of survival: become invisible. She could pass down the corridor without anyone noticing, slip food scraps from plates when the older boys weren't looking, vanish into the corner like mist when Agnes Moore, the director, stormed past. The other children called her Ghost. It wasn't a nickname she hated. Being unseen often meant being safe. Agnes Moore was the kind of woman who carried winter in her bones. Her hair, once blonde, was wound into a severe bun, so tight it seemed to pull the lines of her face even sharper. Her lips pinched as though she'd bitten into something sour 20 years ago and had never stopped tasting it. And at 58 she had perfected cruelty the way other people perfected a craft. She did not shout much. She didn't need to. The sound of her orthopedic shoes clicking down the hallway was enough. The quick, angry staccato of her steps meant someone would be slapped or sent hungry to bed. The slow, deliberate rhythm was worse. It meant the basement closet, the one that smelled of mold and fear. Emily never called her aunt. She didn't even know she was family. That revelation lay waiting in the dark like a snake in the grass. For now, Agnes was simply the warden, a woman who pocketed state funds meant for children's meals, and instead served them broth thin as rainwater. The ache in Emily's stomach should have been unbearable, yet she had grown used to it. Hunger was just part of the day, like the rain that never seemed to stop in Oregon. Still, She dreamed of apples, the crisp sweetness of them. Sometimes she would chew the inside of her cheek, just to remember what biting into something solid felt like. But if Riverbend was a place of rot, the forest beyond its chain-link fence was something else entirely. Emily could see it from the dormitory windows. Douglas firs rising like cathedral spires, their branches heavy with moss, the floor carpeted with ferns and pine needles. Where the orphanage walls trapped her, the forest whispered freedom. It was wild and unpredictable, but it did not judge. It did not starve her. Out there, she wasn't a ghost. Out there, she was simply Emily. Most nights, when the older children slept and Agnes was in her office counting stolen dollars, Emily would slip through a gap in the fence she had discovered years before. The metal edges cut her palms, but she no longer felt the sting. She would vanish into the trees, her bare feet silent on the damp earth. The forest became her teacher. It showed her which mushrooms were safe, where the salmon berries grew in thorny clusters, how the streams always ran cold even in summer. She learned to read animal tracks like a second language. Deer prints shaped like hearts, raccoon paws like tiny hands, the silent sweep of owls in the snow. The forest fed her in ways Riverbend never could, sometimes with berries, sometimes simply with quiet. But more than food, it offered her something sacred, a place where she belonged. The woods did not care that she was small or hungry or unloved. They simply accepted her. She knew every deer trail within 3 miles, every hollow log that could hide her from sight. If Agnes was the storm, the forest was her refuge. That night, like many before, Emily sat on the edge of her narrow cot, listening. The rain pattered on the roof, leaking through the ceiling in steady drops that filled a rusted bucket. Around her, the other children slept in restless murmurs, their thin blankets pulled up to chins. From the hallway came the measured click of Agnes's shoes. The sound grew louder, paused at the doorway, then moved on. Emily released the breath she'd been holding. She reached beneath her pillow and touched the silver chain hidden there, her mother's ring, the only inheritance she had. She didn't remember much about her mother, only flashes, a laugh like bells, the warmth of arms that smelled faintly of lavender. Agnes told her those memories were false, that her mother had died when Emily was very small. But the ring was proof enough that someone, once, had loved her. She clutched it now like a talisman. Somewhere deep inside, she knew there had to be more to life than this. The hunger, the punishments, the loneliness. Surely they weren't all she was meant for. And so, when the rain slowed and the house sank into the heavy breathing of sleep, Emily slid from her bed. She crept down the hallway, avoiding the squeaky boards, slipped through the laundry room, and reached the chain-link fence. The gap was still there, hidden by vines. She pushed through, feeling the sting of cold metal, and stepped into the waiting arms of the forest. Out there, the air was sharper, filled with the scent of pine resin and damp earth. The trees seemed to bow, whispering secrets only she could hear. She pressed her hand to the bark of the nearest fir, grounding herself. This was her world now, the place where hunger might still gnaw, but where hope lived in the silence. Emily did not know that the forest was about to give her something far greater than food or comfort, something that would change her life forever. Because not far from Devil's Peak, beneath an ancient oak, another soul had been abandoned, wounded, and left to die. And soon, the paths of girl and dog would cross, 2 shadows colliding in the wilderness. The morning at Riverbend began like every other, with hunger. Breakfast was a ladle of thin oatmeal that tasted of dust, and a piece of bread so stale it could cut the inside of a child's mouth. Emily Carter sat at the end of the long wooden table, head lowered, watching the older boys snatch the best pieces before she could reach them. She didn't protest. She never did. That was how you survived here, by making yourself smaller, quieter, almost invisible. When Agnes Moore swept into the dining hall, her heels clicking like hammers on the cracked linoleum, every child straightened in their seat. Agnes's sharp eyes scanned the room, calculating, daring anyone to break the silence. Emily broke her bread into crumbs and slipped half into her pocket when Agnes wasn't looking. That was her ritual. Save what she could, because she never knew who would go hungry later. By the time the other children were herded into chores, Emily had already begun her escape. She moved through the laundry room, slipped behind the broken washing machine, and pressed herself against the chain-link fence. Her fingers found the familiar gap hidden by vines. She ducked low, ignoring the scrape of metal against her knees, and slipped out into the waiting arms of the forest. The transformation was instant. Inside Riverbend, the air was stale, heavy with bleach and despair. Outside, it was alive. A breeze rushed through the Douglas firs, carrying the earthy perfume of moss and pine needles. The morning sun filtered through branches in beams of liquid gold, turning the dew into jewels that clung to ferns and spiderwebs. Emily breathed deeply, filling her lungs until it hurt. Out here, she wasn't a ghost. Out here, she was a creature of the woods. She uncurled her small fist and revealed the crumbs she had saved. Kneeling near a patch of damp earth, she scattered them for the chickadees that always followed her. Within seconds, the tiny birds swooped down, feathers flashing black and white. Their trust was delicate, hard-won, and Emily never betrayed it. She smiled faintly, a rare smile, as one brave bird landed close enough that she could feel the brush of air from its wings. Emily's hunger gnawed at her belly, but the forest always gave something in return. She knew which bushes bore the last stubborn blackberries, their skins wrinkled but still sweet. She knew where mushrooms sprouted in the shadow of fallen logs, chanterelles with golden ridges, not the poisonous kinds she'd memorized from library books. She even knew how to crack river stones to find crayfish hiding in the cold pools. That morning, she followed a deer trail deeper into the woods, the bread crust still hidden in her pocket. She planned to eat it later, after she found berries to soften it. Her bare feet pressed silently against the soft carpet of needles, her eyes sharp for any sign of danger. Riverbend had taught her vigilance. The forest had taught her how to turn vigilance into skill. Every broken branch, every shift in birdsong meant something. When the forest grew quiet, she froze too, heart racing until sound returned. She learned from the animals, foxes that slunk low to the ground, owls that waited motionless until the moment was right. Survival was her only inheritance, and she wore it like second skin. She reached her secret stream, a ribbon of water tumbling over rocks polished smooth by time. Dropping to her knees, she cupped her hands and drank deeply. The water stung cold against her teeth, but it was pure, unlike the metallic tap water at Riverbend. She splashed some on her face, washing away the grime of the orphanage, letting the chill anchor her to this moment. On the opposite bank, a doe stepped cautiously from the trees, her ears swiveling. Emily froze, holding her breath. The animal's dark eyes met hers across the stream, a silent acknowledgement. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the forest itself had accepted her. The doe dipped her head to drink, unafraid, and Emily felt warmth bloom in her chest. Here, among moss and fern, she belonged. But belonging didn't erase the marks of Riverbend. The rope scars on her wrists, punishment from Agnes for defending a smaller child, itched when she remembered. The forest soothed her, but it didn't erase the truth. Sooner or later, she would have to crawl back through the fence, back into hunger and cruelty. Still, she stretched every moment of freedom as far as it would go. She lingered near the stream, humming softly under her breath. It was a tune she half remembered, something her mother used to sing, maybe. She couldn't recall the words, only the rise and fall, a lullaby the trees seemed to echo back to her. When the sun climbed higher, Emily stood and brushed dirt from her knees. She tucked the bread crust back into her pocket and turned toward Devil's Peak, the limestone cliff that loomed beyond the forest. The older kids whispered about it, saying spirits wandered there. Emily never went close, at least, not until today. Because today, something different rode the wind. Not the sharp tang of pine, not the earthy musk of damp soil. Something else. Thin, strained, broken. She tilted her head and listened. A sound drifted through the trees, faint, trembling. A whimper. It was so soft that another child might have missed it. But Emily had ears trained by necessity, sharpened by silence. She froze, pulse quickening. The whimper came again, followed by a ragged breath that didn't belong to deer or fox. Her bare feet carried her forward almost against her will. She pushed through salmonberry bushes, thorns scratching her arms, heart hammering louder with every step. The sound grew clearer, pain and desperation tangled together. She didn't know what she would find. She only knew this. Something was suffering, and Emily Carter, ghost of Riverbend, could never walk away from suffering. The forest grew quieter the closer Emily crept toward Devil's Peak. The usual chatter of chickadees and sparrows had stilled. Even the branches, heavy with autumn damp, seemed to hold their breath. Emily knew the silence of the woods. It was not peace. It was a warning. She slowed her steps, her small frame tense, ears straining. There it was again. A sound, fragile and raw, carried on the wind. A whimper. Not human, not fox or raccoon. It was lower, heavier, threaded with pain. Emily's heart stuttered. She tightened her fingers around the crust of bread still in her pocket, as though it could somehow protect her. She pushed forward, thorns snagging her thin jacket, ferns brushing her legs. The whimper grew louder, punctuated by shallow, labored breaths. The air smelled faintly of rot and something metallic. Blood. Emily swallowed hard, her pulse quickening, and parted a cluster of salmonberry branches. What she saw made her freeze. Beneath the twisted arms of an ancient oak, a German shepherd lay bound in ropes. His body was massive but wasted. His coat, once surely sleek, was clumped with dirt and dried blood. The rope cut cruelly into his chest and legs, digging so deep it left raw wounds that oozed infection. Flies circled lazily, and the earth beneath him was dark with stains that told of long suffering. But it was not the wounds that stopped Emily cold. It was his eyes. Amber, glowing faintly in the dim light, locked onto hers with a force that rooted her to the spot. They were not the eyes of an animal resigned to death. They were pleading eyes, intelligent, haunting, as if recognizing something in her that no one else had ever seen. For a long heartbeat, Girl and dog simply stared at one another. Two shadows in the wilderness, both starved, both discarded. The shepherd gave a weak whine, his tail twitching once against the ground. The effort seemed to cost him everything. Emily's chest tightened until it hurt. She knew that sound. She had heard it from new children on their first nights at Riverbend, the low, broken cry of someone realizing they'd been left behind. Her bare feet moved before she told them to. She knelt in the pine needles, the dampness seeping through her knees, and whispered, "It's okay." The shepherd's nostrils flared, catching her scent. His body trembled, but he did not lunge or bare his teeth. Instead, he lowered his great head against the ground, exposing the matted fur of his neck, as if offering her the choice, come closer or walk away. Emily's hands shook as she pulled the bread crust from her pocket. It was all she had, meant to soften her own hunger later. But looking at him, skin stretched tight over ribs, sides heaving with effort, her hunger felt small, unimportant. She broke the crust in half and held out the piece with trembling fingers. The shepherd's eyes flicked from her hand to her face. Pride seemed to war with desperation. Then, with infinite gentleness, he lifted his muzzle and took the bread. His teeth brushed close, but never touched her skin. He chewed slowly, carefully, savoring not just the food, but the trust behind it. Emily's throat burned. She blinked fast, unwilling to let the tears fall. "Good boy," she whispered, though she didn't know if he was anyone's boy anymore. The ropes around him were thick, blue and white, like the marine rope she'd seen near the harbor. They weren't tied in clumsy knots. They were precise, deliberate, sailor's knots she had once seen in a picture book. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted to restrain him. They had wanted him to suffer. Emily reached out, her fingers brushing the frayed strands. The shepherd flinched, then stilled, his eyes never leaving hers. In that gaze, she felt something impossible. Trust. Her heart thudded. She wasn't supposed to be here. If Agnes found out, the punishments would be unbearable. But as the shepherd's shallow breaths rasped in her ears, Emily knew there was no choice to make. She could not leave him. "You waited," she murmured, her voice catching. "You knew someone would come." The shepherd's tail moved again, a faint thump against the dirt, as though agreeing. Emily pressed her palm to the earth to steady herself. Her hunger, her fear, Agnes's cruelty, none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was this broken creature looking at her as if she was salvation itself. She reached for the knots, testing them. They were tight, cutting deep. She didn't have the strength to undo them now, not with her bare hands, but she would come back. She would find a way. The shepherd's body trembled as he lowered his muzzle onto his paws, but his eyes never wavered. For the first time in Emily's life, she felt the weight of someone else's trust pressing against her like a mantle. "I'll come back," she whispered fiercely. "I promise." The dog gave a low, almost inaudible whine. Not despair this time. Agreement. Emily rose slowly, her knees stiff from kneeling. She took one last look at him, tied to the oak like a prisoner, and then backed away, her small frame swallowed by the ferns. The forest seemed to sigh as she vanished into its shadows. Behind her, the shepherd closed his eyes, the taste of stale bread still on his tongue. He had been abandoned, starved, bound by hands that meant only harm. But for the first time in weeks, maybe months, he believed he might live. Because a child with haunted eyes had looked at him and seen not a dying animal, but a soul worth saving. The next morning at Riverbend, Emily could barely swallow the grey oatmeal ladled into her bowl. The other children slurped mechanically, their eyes glazed from too many mornings, just like this one. But Emily's mind wasn't in the dining hall. It was back in the forest, under the ancient oak, where amber eyes had found hers in the half-light. The German shepherd hadn't left her thoughts all night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. The ropes biting into his flesh, the way his ribs rose and fell in shallow desperation, the fragile wag of his tail. She had promised to return, and in Emily's world, promises were rare things, rare enough that, when one was made, it had to be kept. She palmed half of her bread when Agnes wasn't looking. The crust was stale, rough against her hand, but it was all she had. Agnes's eyes narrowed as she swept past, her shoes echoing on the floorboards, but Emily kept her face blank. Years of practice had taught her how to look empty. Inside, though, her chest thudded with urgency. By mid-morning, chores sent the children scattering, scrubbing pots, sweeping corridors, hauling laundry. Emily slipped through the back hallway, her feet memorizing the safe boards that didn't creak, her small body pressed close to the walls. She moved like a shadow until she reached the laundry room, then ducked behind the broken washer, heart pounding as she listened for footsteps. Silence. She slid through the vine-covered gap in the fence. The air outside was cooler, damp from last night's rain. The forest exhaled a welcome, and Emily let herself breathe for the first time that day. She clutched the bread crust in her pocket and began to run. Her bare feet barely made a sound as she wove through the ferns and undergrowth. She knew the paths now, the deer trails, the mossy rocks that marked her way toward Devil's Peak. Her hunger nagged at her belly, sharp and insistent, but she pushed it aside. There was another kind of hunger waiting in the woods. When she reached the oak tree, the sight of him nearly undid her. The shepherd was still there, bound in the cruel knots, his massive body trembling with exhaustion. His eyes flickered open at her approach, and when he recognized her, a faint whine broke from his throat. His tail twitched once against the dirt. Emily's throat closed. She dropped to her knees beside him, the damp earth soaking into her dress. "I came back," she whispered. "I told you I would." The dog's gaze never left her. There was no accusation in it, only waiting, only trust. Her hands shook as she pulled the crust from her pocket. It was small, barely enough to fill even her own hunger. But she held it out, palm open, inches from his muzzle. "Here," she said softly. "It's all I have." The shepherd sniffed, nostrils flaring. For a heartbeat, pride seemed to stiffen his body, as if refusing charity. Then, with a gentleness that brought tears to Emily's eyes, he lowered his head and took the bread. His teeth brushed close to her fingers, but never touched. He chewed slowly, savoring each dry bite as if it were a feast. Emily let out a shaky breath. Her fear had been that he might snap, that hunger would make him wild, but no, his restraint was deliberate, careful, almost protective. Even in his pain, he chose not to harm her. "You're different," she murmured, brushing dirt from his matted fur. "Not just any dog." The shepherd's amber eyes lifted to hers, steady, searching. In that moment, Emily felt something shift inside her, like a door opening to a place she had never dared to imagine. She wiped her sleeve across her nose and whispered, "I can't call you just dog. You deserve more than that." She studied him, his massive frame, the way he lay so still yet watchful, as if even in weakness he was guarding her. His eyes, deep and unyielding, reminded her of the forest rangers she sometimes glimpsed from afar, men who stood tall against storms, who never turned away from danger. Her lips trembled into the faintest of smiles. "I'll call you Ranger, because that's what you look like. Someone who watches, who protects, someone who doesn't give up." The dog, Ranger now, shifted slightly, his tail brushing the dirt again, a silent acknowledgement. His eyes glowed faintly brighter, as though he understood the name was not just a label, but a promise. Emily pressed her small hand against the ropes cutting into his chest. "I'll get you out," she whispered fiercely. "Not today, not yet. But soon. You're not going to die here, Ranger." The shepherd gave a soft whine, low and rough, but not hopeless anymore. For the first time in her life, Emily felt what it meant to be trusted absolutely. Not by another child who might betray her to Agnes, not by an adult who saw her as a burden, but by this broken creature, whose very life now seemed bound to hers. The wind shifted, rustling the oak's branches above them. Emily glanced around, her skin prickling with unease. Whoever had tied him here might still be watching. She leaned closer, her voice urgent. "I'll come back tonight, with more food, with water. Just stay alive until then, okay?" Ranger's eyes never blinked, never wavered. And in their depths, Emily thought she saw an answer. "I'll stay. For you." She rose, brushing dirt from her knees, her stomach empty, but her chest strangely full. One last look, one last silent promise, and she slipped back into the trees. Behind her, Ranger closed his eyes, a faint breath escaping his muzzle. For the first time since the ropes had bound him, he allowed himself to believe he would not die here, because a girl with haunted eyes had named him, and names had power. Twilight draped the forest in grey when Emily returned, clutching a chipped tin cup of water stolen from the kitchen. Her small chest heaved from running, her legs trembling, but she didn't slow until she reached the oak tree. Ranger was still there. His body lay slack against the earth, eyes half-lidded. But when Emily's footsteps broke through the underbrush, his ears twitched. Slowly, he lifted his head. Recognition flickered in those amber eyes, faint but fierce enough to make Emily's throat tighten. "I told you I'd come back," she whispered, kneeling beside him. She pressed the cup to his muzzle, careful not to spill. Ranger lapped weakly, each swallow sounding like hope itself. Emily set the cup aside and studied the cruel knots. They'd eaten deeper into his skin, leaving angry, swollen wounds. Her dull pocket knife could not cut them fast enough. She tugged until her hands burned, until the rope finally gave way, falling in damp coils around his legs. When the last strand fell, Ranger tried to rise. His muscles shuddered, his limbs trembled, and he collapsed with a soft whine of frustration. Emily caught his head in her lap, stroking his ears. "Don't, not yet. You're too weak. I'll help you." Her eyes darted to the distance. The orphanage was 2 miles away, and Agnes was always counting, always watching. But the old groundskeeper's shed lay behind the property, hidden among blackberry thickets. Abandoned for years. No one ever went near it. Emily had discovered it by accident. Broken windows, a door hanging loose, dust and spiders ruling the place. To her, it had always seemed less like a ruin and more like a waiting refuge. Now, it would be Ranger's. She rose, her skinny frame braced by determination, far too big for her 8 years. "We can't stay here," she told him, though she knew he didn't understand the words. "If they find you, they'll finish what they started." Ranger lifted his head, as though agreeing. Emily tugged him gently, slipping her arms under his chest. He was heavier than anything she had ever tried to move, solid muscle beneath the bones of starvation. Her legs shook with the effort. She dragged him inch by inch, using branches and a tattered jacket as makeshift supports. The ground scraped her knees raw, but she didn't stop. Every few steps, Ranger tried to help, shifting his weight, pushing forward with his hind legs. His tail gave the faintest wag when she murmured, "That's it. You're doing so good. Just a little farther." It took over an hour to reach the shed. By then, darkness had thickened, stars pricking through the canopy. Emily's arms were numb, her breath ragged, her clothes torn. But when she shoved the door open and pulled Ranger inside, relief crashed through her like a tide. The shed smelled of old hay and rusted tools. Dust motes spun in the lantern light from a hole in the roof. In the corner lay a pile of brittle tarps, stiff with age but still intact. Emily dragged them together, spreading her thin jacket over the top. "It's not much," she whispered, guiding Ranger onto the makeshift bed. "But it's better than the dirt." He sank into the nest with a heavy sigh. His ribs rose and fell, each breath slow but steady. Emily sat beside him, her body aching, and pressed her forehead to his side. "You're safe now, at least for tonight." Her voice trembled, but her words carried something stronger than certainty. A vow. Ranger turned his great head, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. For a long moment, they simply stared at one another. Then, slowly, painfully, he lifted one massive paw. It came down against her thin arm, a touch so deliberate it felt like language. Emily froze. The weight of his paw was heavy, but not crushing. It was a gesture. Trust, surrender, promise. Her throat tightened. You're saying thank you, aren't you?" The shepherd's eyes softened, amber glowing like coals. Emily placed her small hand over his paw, fingers curling into the matted fur. "Then you're welcome. But it's more than that. I'm not leaving you. Ever." The words spilled out before she could stop them. She had never promised such a thing to anyone. At Riverbend, promises were weapons. They were broken as easily as bread crusts. But this vow felt different, solid, true. Outside, the forest whispered through the trees, carrying scents of rain and earth. Inside, in the cracked shed, a starving girl and a broken dog had bound themselves together with nothing more than trust. Emily curled beside him on the tarp, pulling her knees to her chest. Hunger gnawed at her belly. Exhaustion dragged at her bones, but she felt safer than she had in years, safer than in any bed Riverbend had ever offered. "Good night, Ranger," she murmured, her eyelids fluttering closed. "We'll get better, both of us." His tail thumped once, soft against the tarp, before he drifted into uneasy sleep. For the first time in a long time, Emily dreamed of something other than hunger or punishment. She dreamed of a world where she wasn't invisible, a world where a dog with amber eyes walked at her side, guarding her against every shadow. And in his sleep, Ranger dreamed too, of hands that didn't hurt, of voices that soothed, of a girl who had pulled him back from the edge of death and given him a name worth living for. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm, one built on secrecy, hunger, and quiet acts of devotion. Every morning, Emily endured the thin rations at Riverbend. Waiting for the moment, Agnes's sharp eyes flicked elsewhere. Then her small hands went to work. She hid scraps in her pockets, crusts of bread, bits of apple left half-eaten, the softest corner of a potato from the watery stew. Once, she even smuggled out a chicken bone, gnawed clean by the older boys, but still carrying the ghost of flavor. Each night, when the corridors fell silent and the older children curled into their bunks, Emily slipped through the laundry room gap and crossed into the forest. The cold Oregon air bit her cheeks, but anticipation warmed her. She moved barefoot, silent, as though the woods had adopted her into their own rhythm. At the shed, Ranger always waited. At first, he would lift his head at the sound of her footsteps, tail giving a single thump against the tarp. But as the days passed, that welcome grew stronger, eyes brightening, ears pricking, a faint whine rumbling from his chest. He knew her now. She was no longer a stranger. She was his person. Emily knelt at his side, laying out the stolen treasures with reverence. Sometimes it was barely enough for one meal, but Ranger took each offering as though it were a feast. What astonished her most was the care he showed. Even when hunger clawed at his ribs, he never snatched food from her hand. He leaned forward gently, teeth brushing her fingers like a whisper, as if reminding her he would never hurt her. After he ate, Emily cleaned his wounds. She used strips of her own dress, torn carefully where no one would notice, dampened with water from the stream. The rope burns were deep, angry lines carved into his flesh, but slowly, under her trembling hands, they began to heal. She whispered to him as she worked, filling the shed with a softness Riverbend had never known. "You're stronger every day," she would murmur, brushing fur from the edge of a scar. "Stronger than me, but that's okay. We'll both get stronger together." Sometimes, when exhaustion threatened to crush her, she leaned against him and hummed a melody she barely remembered. A lullaby her mother had sung, the words long lost, but the tune still alive in her chest. Ranger would close his eyes, his great head resting against her lap, his breath sinking with hers. In those moments, Emily felt something she hadn't in years: safe. The contrast was sharpest when she returned to Riverbend. There, the air reeked of bleach and boiled cabbage. Children's cries were met with slaps or silence. Agnes's voice carried through the halls like a blade, slicing hope to ribbons. Emily moved like a ghost, quiet and invisible, bearing the punishments meant for others, always carrying hunger in her belly and secrets in her heart. But at the shed, life was different. There, she was not invisible. She was needed. Every scrap she stole, every wound she cleaned, every note she sang mattered. She could see it in Ranger's eyes, the way he followed her movements, ears twitching at her voice, muscles relaxing when her hands touched him. It was on the 7th night that she noticed something new. She had held out her hand to quiet him when a branch snapped outside. Instinctively, she raised her palm, the way she had once seen a ranger hush a police dog in town. To her astonishment, Ranger froze. His growl cut off instantly, his amber eyes locked on her hand. Emily blinked, lowering her arm. You understand that?" She tried again the next day. When she lifted her palm, Ranger stilled. When she pointed, he followed the direction of her finger, weak legs moving with surprising obedience. Something stirred in Emily's chest, a spark of realization. He had been trained once, trained to listen, to obey. Whoever had left him to die had discarded more than just a dog. They had abandoned a soldier. But to Emily, he wasn't just a trained animal. He was family. She began experimenting, small gestures in the flickering lamplight of the shed. A point meant stay. A pat on the top meant lie down. When she clapped softly, he dragged himself closer, eyes gleaming with pride despite his pain. Each success filled her with something she couldn't name. Not just joy, not just hope. Power, maybe. The power to connect, to build something no one could take from her. One night, after he had obeyed a signal perfectly, she pressed her forehead against his and whispered, You're not just surviving anymore. You're living, and so am I." Ranger gave a soft chuff, his warm breath mingling with hers. Then he did something that left her trembling. He lifted his paw and set it firmly against her arm again. The same vow as before, but stronger now. A promise renewed. Emily covered his paw with both hands, her small fingers dwarfed by his size. "We're in this together," she told him, "no matter what." The shed grew colder as the Oregon rains came, dripping through the cracked roof, but Emily didn't mind. She brought stolen blankets, patched leaks with rags, and huddled against Ranger's side for warmth. The world outside remained cruel. Agnes's punishments grew harsher, the food scarcer. But Emily bore it all with a secret smile. Because she knew, every night, a pair of amber eyes waited for her. Eyes that had seen her not as a ghost, but as a savior. And in that broken shed, two abandoned souls stitched together something like love. The rains had passed, leaving the Oregon forest damp and sweet. Shafts of pale light pierced through the canopy, landing in silver pools on the moss. Emily sat cross-legged inside the shed, brushing Ranger's fur with an old hairbrush she'd found in the orphanage's discard pile. Its handle was cracked, half the bristles missing, but she wielded it like a treasure. Ranger leaned into her strokes, his eyes half closed in bliss. The transformation in him over the past weeks amazed her. The jutting bones along his ribs had softened, covered now by fur that gleamed faintly when the light touched it. His wounds were scabbing over, no longer raw, and the hollow look in his eyes had been replaced with something steadier, stronger. "You're handsome again," Emily whispered, running the brush along his flank. "Not that you ever stopped being, but now you look like you belong to someone." The words hung in the air, heavier than she expected. She frowned, her fingers parting his thick fur to check the healing skin beneath. That's when she felt it. A hard bump, small and unnatural, just under the base of his neck. Her heart stuttered. She pushed the fur aside, her hands careful, and there it was. A faint line of scar tissue, thin as thread, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Her fingertips brushed the raised mark, and Ranger flinched, not in pain, but in memory, as if the touch awakened something buried deep. Emily froze. She had seen scars like this once before, in a library book about veterinary medicine. Surgical scars, and beneath them, chips. Her gaze snapped to Ranger's eyes. "They put something in you, didn't they?" she whispered. Ranger stared back, silent, as if he too understood the weight of her discovery. Emily's mind raced. She had seen dogs in town wearing collars with little metal tags, pets, belonging to people who cared enough to claim them. But this was different. This scar wasn't from a tag or a collar. It was from something hidden under his skin. Her chest tightened. Ranger hadn't always been alone. He hadn't always been starving under an oak tree. Someone had once wanted him enough to cut into his flesh and leave a mark that would never fade. The thought filled her with emotions she couldn't untangle. Relief, because it meant he mattered to someone once. Fear, because it meant someone might come looking. And jealousy, sharp and bitter, because if he belonged to someone else, then maybe he wasn't hers at all. Her fingers hovered over the scar, tracing it gently. "Who were you before?" Ranger gave a low whine, nudging her wrist with his nose, as if to anchor her in the present. Emily bit her lip. "Maybe you were a police dog, or a soldier. You act like one. You listen to me like you've done this before." She swallowed, her throat burning. "Maybe you were important. Maybe someone's still searching for you." She wanted to stop thinking about it, but the idea dug into her like a thorn. At Riverbend, no one searched for the children who ended up there. They were ghosts, forgotten by parents, by families, by the world. Emily had long accepted that truth. But looking at Ranger, his scars, his trained obedience, his quiet intelligence, she knew he hadn't been thrown away by accident. He had been taken or lost. And if he had once been loved, truly loved, what right did she have to keep him? Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his neck, right above the scar. "I don't want to lose you. You're all I have." Ranger shifted, his weight pressing into her, steady and immovable. His tail brushed the top, a soft sound in the silence. He wasn't leaving. Not now. Not yet. Emily let out a shaky breath. The world had never given her certainty, but Ranger's presence was as close as she had ever come. Still, the scar was a reminder. He had a story she didn't know, a past she couldn't touch. And one day, that past might come to claim him. She pulled back, wiping her cheeks with her sleeve. "If someone comes for you, I'll figure it out when it happens. But until then, you're mine, my Ranger." Ranger lifted his paw and set it on her arm, the same vow he had made before. This time, it felt like an answer, not just to her words, but to her fear. Emily smiled through her tears. "Okay. Then we stay together, no matter what." Outside, the forest whispered, and a crow called from the trees, its cry echoing like a warning. Inside the shed, a girl and a dog clung to the fragile bond that had saved them both, unaware that the scar beneath Ranger's fur was the key to a truth that would soon change everything. The rain had been steady all night, drumming against the roof of the shed, slipping through cracks to drip onto the floor. By dawn, Emily's thin dress clung damply to her skin, and her breath fogged in the cool air. Ranger pressed close, his warmth the only barrier between her and the cold. But her thoughts were restless, circling back to the scar at the base of his neck. That scar wasn't just a mark, it was proof. Proof that he had once belonged to someone who might still be looking. Emily couldn't push the thought aside any longer. If she wanted answers, she had to find them. By mid-morning, she had formed her plan. Agnes always left Riverbend on Mondays, driving her rusting sedan into town under the excuse of supplies. Everyone knew it really meant the casino. That gave Emily a window of a few hours. When the children were sent to scrub the dining hall floors, Emily slipped away, her movements fluid from years of practice. She pressed herself against the walls, counted the rhythm of footsteps, and moved like a shadow through the laundry room gap. Once outside, she ran, her heart pounding in time with her feet slapping against the mud. The Cascade Public Library stood at the far end of town, its brick walls worn and softened by Oregon's endless rains. To most kids, it was a place of boredom. To Emily, it was a sanctuary. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, had never asked too many questions about why a thin girl in patched clothes came so often, why she spent hours devouring books about everything from wild plants to sailing knots. Mrs. Chen simply smiled and let her stay. Emily ducked inside, shaking water from her hair. The familiar smell of paper and dust enveloped her like a blanket. Rows of shelves stretched into quiet shadows, but today she wasn't there for stories. Today, she needed facts. She went straight to the public computers, their hum loud in the silence. Her fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard. She couldn't type quickly, but she had learned enough to search for answers. Slowly, she tapped out the words. Missing German Shepherd, Oregon, microchip. Dozens of results filled the screen. lost pets, adoption notices, small-town reward posters. But one headline snagged her breath. Missing Valor. $1,000 reward. Emily clicked it. The article unfolded with the kind of polished clarity that made her stomach knot. A color photograph filled the screen, and she gasped aloud. It was Ranger. Strong, healthy, his fur shining like burnished wood. He stood tall beside an elderly man with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The caption read, Valor, beloved German shepherd of billionaire philanthropist Alexander Hayes, disappeared from his Cascade County estate 6 months ago. A $1 million reward is offered for information leading to his safe return. Emily's pulse roared in her ears. Valor. That was his real name. The proof was undeniable. The same amber eyes, the same proud lines of his body. The dog in the photograph and the one waiting in her shed were the same. She leaned closer, reading every word. Hayes had described Valor as family, the last piece of home I have left. The article said the dog had been trained extensively, not just as a protection animal, but as a therapy companion. Authorities suspected professional theft. Other purebred shepherds had been killed when ransom demands weren't met. Emily's hands trembled on the mouse. $1 million. The number was too large for her to even comprehend. She thought of the cracked walls of Riverbend, of the nights when children went to bed hungry, of Tommy's hollow eyes when he cried for food. That money could change everything. Enough food, warm beds, safety. No more fear of Agnes's punishments. Her eyes stung. For the first time, she imagined a world where children didn't have to live invisible, where she didn't have to hoard crusts of bread just to stay alive. And all of that was possible if she gave Valor back. Her chest tightened. No, Ranger. He wasn't Valor to her. He wasn't just a reward poster or a symbol of someone else's wealth. He was the dog who had rested his paw on her arm, who had trusted her with his pain. She closed her eyes, clutching the edge of the desk. If she told Hayes she'd lose him, Ranger would go back to a world of marble floors and diamond collars, and she would be left with nothing again, alone as always. But if she kept him, wasn't she stealing? The war raged inside her, louder than the rain outside. Her small reflection stared back from the computer screen. Hollow cheeks, rope scars on her wrists, eyes older than her years. She thought of Ranger's gaze meeting hers in the forest that first day, the silent understanding they had shared. Two abandoned souls, both unwanted, both surviving against odds. Her whisper cracked in the empty library. He's mine. The word felt selfish, wrong, but also true. Emily forced herself to clear the browser history, her survival instincts kicking in. She memorized the number from the article before closing it, just in case. Then she shut down the computer and sat motionless for a long time, her hands balled into fists on her lap. When she finally rose, her decision was made. Ranger, Valor, might once have belonged to a billionaire. He might be worth $1 million. But in Emily's heart, he was worth infinitely more. He was hers. And she would protect him with the same ferocity he had shown her from the moment their eyes met. As she stepped back into the rain, her mother's ring pressed cold against her chest. She clutched it tightly, whispering into the gray air, I won't lose him. Not like I lost you. The storm clouds rolled overhead, heavy and foreboding. Somewhere far away, Alexander Hayes was still searching for his dog. And somewhere even closer, Agnes Moore's eyes were already narrowing, her suspicion growing. But Emily didn't know that yet. All she knew was that her secret was now heavier than ever, because it carried the weight of $1 million and the fragile beating of her own heart. The rain had softened to a mist when Emily made her way back to the shed. Her shoes squelched in the mud, her dress heavy with damp. In her mind, the library's glowing screen replayed again and again. Valor's name, the photograph of him beside Alexander Hayes, the words, $1 million. When she pushed open the shed door, Ranger lifted his head from the tarp, ears twitching. His tail thumped once against the floorboards, as though he had been waiting all day just to see her. Emily dropped to her knees beside him, burying her face in his damp fur, her small body trembling. "I know who you are," she whispered into his coat. "You're not just Ranger. You're Valor. You belong to someone else." Ranger shifted, pressing his muzzle against her shoulder. His eyes searched hers, amber and unyielding. Emily pulled back, tears stinging. "They want you back. A man. A rich man. He said you're family. He's looking for you." Her words cracked. "And there's money. Enough to save everyone at Riverbend. Enough to give us food, beds, maybe even families." The shed was quiet, except for the patter of water dripping through the roof. Emily hugged her knees, rocking slightly. She could picture Tommy's hollow face, Anna's quiet sobs at night, the way the smaller children begged for scraps. The money could fix everything. But then she looked at Ranger, at the healing scars on his body, the way he had trusted her hands on his wounds, the way he followed her gestures without hesitation. He was more than a missing dog on a poster. He was hers. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I can't give you up. If I do, then I'll have nothing again. I'll be invisible. A ghost." Ranger's ears flicked, as though hearing the weight of her decision. He shifted his paw forward until it rested against her arm, the vow he had made before, renewed now with quiet certainty. Emily let out a sob, pressing her small hand over his paw. "Then we'll hide," she decided. "I don't care if the whole world is looking for you. They won't find you here, not as long as I'm alive." She pulled away just enough to fumble with the collar still tucked beneath a tarp. The expensive leather gleamed faintly in the dim light, the black box attached to it blinking red at steady intervals. A tracker, proof that someone out there was searching. Her fingers trembled as she unbuckled the strap. The LED pulse seemed too loud in the silence, each blink like a heartbeat counting down. Emily shoved it deep into her pocket, pressing the leather hard against her thigh as if to bury it inside her own skin. "They won't follow this," she murmured. "Not if I keep it hidden." It was a small act, but it felt enormous, like drawing a line against the entire world. Ranger huffed softly, curling closer to her side. She stroked his neck where the collar had once sat, the fur still indented from its long grip. Without it, he looked freer, less like a possession, and more like the dog he had chosen to be. Hers. Emily leaned against him, exhaustion seeping through her bones. "It's us now," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "The throwaway girl and the stolen dog. They'll never understand, but we do." The shed creaked as the wind pressed against its rotting boards. Shadows stretched long across the floor, reaching toward them. But Emily didn't feel afraid, not with Ranger beside her. She curled up on the tarp, his warmth pressed into her back, the collar's hard edge still digging into her pocket. It was a reminder, a burden, and a secret. The world outside was dangerous, full of greed and betrayal. But in here, in the dim light of the broken shed, She had made her choice, and in making it, she felt stronger than she ever had. As her eyes closed, she whispered into the darkness, "They'll never take you away from me." Ranger's tail thumped once in answer, and the blinking red light hidden in her pocket pulsed on, unseen, an unspoken countdown to the day her secret would no longer stay hidden. Riverbend always smelled of cabbage and bleach. Even on mornings when no cabbage simmered in the dented pot, the sourness lingered, seeping into the cracked plaster, into the clothes the children wore until they smelled like poverty itself. Emily had learned long ago to move like smoke through its narrow halls, unseen, unnoticed. But no one could stay invisible forever. That morning, she tucked 2 bread crusts into the pocket of her faded dress, the fabric bulging just slightly. She had timed it carefully. Agnes was usually distracted with the mail at this hour, her crooked glasses sliding down her nose as she tore through envelopes, searching for checks to misappropriate. But something was off. The weight of unseen eyes followed Emily as she crossed the dining hall. "Emily Carter," Agnes's voice snapped, sharp as a whip crack. Emily froze. The other children went still, spoons pausing halfway to their mouths. A silence fell over the room, heavy with dread. Agnes Moore rose from her chair at the head of the table. Her orthopedic shoes clicked against the cracked linoleum as she approached, each step deliberate. She was not a tall woman, but she carried the authority of fear itself. "Come with me." Emily's stomach lurched. She forced her face into the blankness she had perfected, the mask that showed nothing. Slowly, she stood and followed Agnes down the corridor, past the peeling wallpaper and locked closets, into the office. The door shut with a hollow thud. Agnes lowered herself into the wooden chair behind the desk. Papers lay scattered across it. Bills she never paid. Reports she falsified. The blinds were half closed, slicing the light into bars that stretched across the floor like prison stripes. "Empty your pockets," Agnes ordered. Emily's breath caught. She shook her head. "I don't have anything." Agnes leaned forward, her pale eyes gleaming with suspicion. "Don't lie to me, girl. I've been running this place for 20 years. I know when a child is sneaking food." Emily forced herself to meet her gaze. "I was just cleaning. That's all." Agnes smiled thinly, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Cleaning? With crumbs in your pocket?" Emily's hand twitched toward the fabric, but she stopped herself. If she pulled the crusts out now, they'd be gone, wasted, and Ranger would go hungry tonight. Agnes watched her like a hawk circling prey. "You've been slipping away at night, haven't you? Think I don't notice when one of my little ghosts disappears?" She tapped a fingernail against the desk, sharp, steady, like the ticking of a clock. Emily swallowed. Her mind scrambled for a lie, any lie. "Sometimes I go to the forest. I like it there." "The forest?" Agnes's eyes narrowed. "What's in the forest that you can't find here?" Everything, Emily wanted to say. Safety, freedom, Ranger. Instead, she whispered, "It's quiet." Agnes studied her for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she stood abruptly and walked around the desk. Her hand clamped down on Emily's shoulder, the grip bruising. She leaned close, her breath smelling of stale coffee. "You remind me of her," she hissed. "Always sneaking, always hiding things. And look where it got her." Emily stiffened. "Who?" Agnes's lips curled. "Your mother." The word struck like a blow. Emily's throat closed, her heart hammering in her chest. But she kept her face blank. She had learned never to let Agnes see her bleed. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered. Agnes squeezed harder. "Don't play dumb. I know you're hiding something. and I will find it. Do you hear me?" Emily nodded quickly, though her jaw clenched until it ached. Finally, Agnes released her. Emily stumbled back, rubbing her shoulder. "Go," Agnes snapped, straightening her glasses. "But know this, I'm watching you. One slip, one mistake, and I'll lock you in that basement so long you'll forget what the sun looks like." Emily fled the office, her pulse pounding in her ears. She didn't stop until she was outside, pressed against the cold brick wall, gasping for breath. Her hand slipped into her pocket, feeling the 2 crusts of bread still safe inside. Relief washed over her, but it was thin, fleeting. Agnes knew. Maybe not everything, not yet, but she knew enough to be dangerous. Emily hugged her arms tight around herself, her mother's ring pressing cold against her chest. She thought of Ranger waiting in the shed, of his eyes lighting up when she came, of his paw resting against her arm. No matter what Agnes suspected, Emily vowed then and there she would not lose him, not to hunger, not to cruelty, not even to Agnes Moore. Twilight settled over Riverbend, the kind of dim grey light that blurred the line between day and night. Emily's heart raced as she hurried across the orphanage yard, clutching a small bundle of stolen bread and scraps wrapped in an old napkin. She kept to the shadows, ducking past the rusted swing set, slipping through the gap in the chain-link fence. The forest greeted her like it always did, with the cool hush of needles underfoot, the resinous perfume of pine, and the safety of silence. Every step away from Riverbend loosened the iron band around her chest. By the time she reached the shed, her breath had steadied. Inside, Ranger lifted his head the moment she pushed the door open. His ears pricked, tail brushing weakly against the floorboards. Emily knelt beside him, unwrapping the napkin. "Here," she whispered. "I know it's not much, but it's yours." He ate carefully, never snatching, as though he understood the gift cost her dearly. Watching him filled her chest with warmth, until the hairs on the back of her neck prickled. A sound, the crunch of leaves outside. Emily froze. Before she could move, the shed door creaked wider, and a silhouette filled the doorway. Agnes Moore. Her face was shadowed, but Emily could see the cold satisfaction in her eyes. She stepped inside, the wooden floor groaning under her orthopedic shoes. "Well, well," she said softly. "So this is what you've been hiding." Emily scrambled to her feet, standing in front of Ranger. "No, it's not. Don't lie." Agnes's voice cut through her protest. "I knew it. Food disappearing, you sneaking off like a thief. And for what?" She pointed a trembling hand at Ranger. "That beast." Ranger rose unsteadily, still weak, but powerful enough to make his presence felt. A low growl rumbled in his chest, vibrating through the boards. His amber eyes locked on Agnes, and he took a step forward until he stood between Emily and the woman who ruled their lives. Agnes's mouth twisted. "Ungrateful wretch. You think you can defy me? Harbor a stray like this?" Her voice rose, shrill with fury. "I should call animal control right now. They'd put him down before sunrise." Emily's breath caught. "No," she cried, her voice breaking. "Please, don't. He's not dangerous." "Not dangerous?" Agnes laughed, bitter as ash. "Look at him. Fangs, muscle. One word from me, and he'll be gone. And you—" her eyes narrowed, cold and cruel. "You'll spend the rest of your days locked in that basement until you learn what obedience means." Ranger's growl deepened, his body taut as a bowstring. Emily placed a trembling hand on his neck, whispering, "Easy, Ranger, easy." But inside, Her own fury rose, hot and fierce. "He's mine," she said, surprising even herself with the strength in her voice. "You don't get to take him." Agnes's gaze snapped to her, sharp as broken glass. "Yours. You own nothing. You are nothing. Just like your mother. Weak, selfish, reckless. And look where she ended up." The words hit Emily like a blow. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her mother. Always the shadow hanging over her. Always twisted into a weapon by Agnes. Ranger barked once, sharp and commanding, as if cutting through the moment. He stepped forward, head low, shoulders squared. The sound reverberated in the small shed, sending a shiver down Emily's spine. For the first time, Agnes faltered. She stepped back, eyes narrowing, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You think this mutt will save you? He'll turn on you the first chance he gets. They all do." Emily shook her head fiercely. "No, he won't. He's not like you." Her voice cracked, but she held her ground. Agnes's nostrils flared. For a moment, silence pressed down, broken only by Ranger's steady growl. Then Agnes hissed, "You'll regret this, girl. You and that dog. I'll make sure of it." She spun on her heel and stormed out, the shed door banging shut behind her. Emily collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving, tears spilling unchecked. Ranger immediately pressed against her, his great body warm and solid. He nosed at her face, whining softly, as though to remind her he was real, here, hers. Emily clung to him, burying her face in his fur. "I won't let her take you," she whispered fiercely. "No matter what she does, we'll fight. Together." Ranger answered with a single thump of his tail, his vow as unshakable as her own. But outside, beyond the safety of the shed, Agnes Moore's footsteps were already carrying a storm toward them, a storm neither girl nor dog could yet imagine. The shed still smelled of damp earth and dog fur when Emily awoke, curled against Ranger's side. She had drifted into a restless sleep, comforted by his warmth, but the echo of Agnes's voice lingered in her dreams, threatening, cruel, promising retribution. When she pushed herself upright, morning light spilled through the broken slats, painting stripes across the floor. Ranger stretched beside her, rising to his feet with a soft groan. His amber eyes watched her, steady and grounding, but they couldn't still the dread curling in her stomach. Agnes knew. Emily had felt it in the way the woman had looked at them, the venom in her words. It wasn't over. She was right. That evening, when the children were herded to their bunks after a dinner of watery soup, Emily slipped once more through the corridors, intending to reach the shed. But as she rounded the corner, a hand shot out, gripping her wrist with cruel force. Agnes. She yanked Emily into her office, the door slamming shut behind them. The room smelled of cigarette smoke and mildew, the blinds half drawn against the last streaks of daylight. "I told you I'd find out what you're hiding," Agnes said, her voice cold. "And now, I know." Emily's chest constricted. She forced her face into the blankness she had practiced for years. "I don't know what you mean." Agnes's laugh was low and sharp. Still lying, just like her. Emily's pulse jumped. "Like who?" Agnes stepped closer, her eyes glittering with a cruel satisfaction. "Your mother." The name landed like a stone in Emily's chest. You said she died in a car accident." Agnes's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "That's what I told you. That's what I told everyone. Easier than the truth." Emily's voice shook. What truth? Agnes leaned down until her face was inches from Emily's. Your mother killed herself, threw herself from Devil's Peak, like the coward she was. Emily's breath caught. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. No. She was weak, Agnes spat. Too weak for this world. Just like you. Emily staggered back, shaking her head. Her hand flew to the chain around her neck, clutching her mother's ring until the edges bit into her skin. You're lying. Am I? Agnes's voice grew almost gleeful. I was there that night. I saw the note she left. She couldn't handle the shame. Couldn't handle raising you alone after that rich bastard abandoned her. So she walked to the edge and stepped off. Emily pressed her hands over her ears, but the words pierced anyway, sharp as glass. Her mother's laughter, faint in memory, shattered against the image Agnes painted. The woman who had once held her close, whispered lullabies, reduced now to despair and a cliff's edge. No, Emily whispered again. She loved me. Agnes's eyes narrowed. Love doesn't put food on the table. Love doesn't keep the lights on. She gave up, Emily, and you've been nothing but a burden ever since. Tears blurred Emily's vision. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the chair by the desk. Her whole body shook, as though the foundation of her life had cracked open. Agnes circled her like a predator. Do you want to know something else? That dog you're hiding? He's not some miracle you stumbled across. He's mine. Emily lifted her head, her tear-streaked face pale. No. He's mine. Agnes's laugh cut through the room. I arranged for him to be taken. Marcus Chen owed me money. I told him to steal Hayes's precious dog and make that billionaire bleed. She leaned closer, her breath hot with bitterness. And it worked. Until you found him. Emily's chest heaved, every word cutting deeper. You tied him to that tree? Agnes shrugged. Marcus handled the details. I told him to make it slow, make it hurt. Harrison, Hayes, whatever he calls himself now, deserved to suffer. That dog was leverage, but you ruined it. Emily's hands clenched around the ring, her knuckles white. Her voice cracked as it rose. You hurt him. You lied about my mother. Agnes cut her off with a slap, the sharp sound echoing in the small office. Emily reeled, but she didn't cry out. Agnes loomed over her, her face twisted with fury. Listen to me, child. That dog is a curse. He belongs to a man who destroyed this family. And if you don't give him up, he'll destroy you, too. Emily's cheek stung, but the greater pain was inside, a hollow, gaping wound where the truth had been ripped open. Her mother hadn't died in an accident. She had chosen to leave Devil's Peak. The image carved itself into Emily's mind, the cliff, the wind, the darkness below. Her voice was barely a whisper. You hate me because I lived. Agnes froze for a moment, then hissed, yes. The word cut sharper than any blade. Emily staggered to her feet, tears streaming freely now. You can take everything else, but not him. Ranger is mine. He's all I have left. Agnes's expression hardened. We'll see. Emily didn't wait. She bolted from the office, the ring clutched tight in her fist, her heart pounding like a drum. She didn't stop until she reached the shed where Ranger waited, his eyes catching hers in the dim light. She fell against him, sobbing into his fur. His paw came to rest on her arm once more, steady, grounding, a vow renewed in silence. The world had collapsed around her, but at that moment she wasn't alone, and that was enough to keep her standing. The forest was darker than usual, a storm crouching low over the Cascade Range, pressing its weight into the trees. Wind hissed through the pines, rattling the tin roof of the abandoned shed where Emily sat with her knees pulled tight against her chest. Ranger lay beside her, amber eyes steady, head resting on his paws like a sentinel. Her cheek still burned faintly from Agnes's slap. But it wasn't the sting that hollowed her. It was the words. The truth Agnes had dropped like a stone into her chest. Your mother threw herself from Devil's Peak. Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the chain around her neck. Her mother's ring hung there, its silver band cold against her skin. She pressed it hard into her palm until it left a red mark, as if pain could anchor her, as if metal could summon memory. A faint image surfaced, her mother's hand brushing her hair back, the whisper of a lullaby, the promise, "I'll never leave you, my little bird." But had she left? Emily's breath caught. If her mother had chosen the cliff over her, then maybe she had never been enough. Maybe she had always been unwanted. Her shoulders shook. "Why?" she whispered into the stale air. "Why wasn't I enough?" Ranger rose and pressed close, his warmth steady, grounding. Emily buried her face in his fur. "You're all I have," she whispered hoarsely. "If she's gone, it's just you, just us." Her fingers brushed the scar beneath his coat, the hidden chip that whispered of another life, another family. Somewhere out there, people were searching for him, wealthy, desperate, waiting. "They'll take you too," she choked. "Everyone leaves." The storm broke then, rain hammering the roof. Emily gripped Ranger's fur with one hand and her mother's ring with the other. "I can't lose you," she said fiercely. Ranger tilted his head. Slowly, he placed a paw on her arm, claws careful, touch gentle. Emily froze. That simple gesture struck deep. No matter what the world tore from her, Ranger had chosen her. Again and again. Her sobs came harder, raw and unrestrained. "I don't know how to be strong. I'm just a kid. I can't fight her. I can't fight the truth." But Ranger stayed, pressed into her, whispering with his presence, "You are not alone." Emily looked down at the ring again, scratched, ordinary, but proof that love had once existed. Maybe broken, maybe twisted by despair, but real. "If you could see me now," she whispered to the mother she half remembered. "Would you be proud or sorry?" The storm gave no answer, but Ranger's tail brushed softly against the boards, reassurance in the dark. A faint ember stirred in her chest, not hope, not yet, but defiance. Agnes had lied before. Could she be lying now? Could there be more to the story? Emily pressed her forehead to Ranger's. "Maybe she loved me, maybe she didn't, but I know you won't leave." Ranger huffed softly, as if in agreement. Her tears slowed, her breath steadied. The storm raged on, but inside the fragile shed, Emily clung to her dog, her ring, and the fragments of memory Agnes couldn't destroy. It wasn't much, but it kept her from breaking. That night, the orphanage lay in silence. Most children slept, but Emily stared at the cracked ceiling above her bunk. Beside her pillow, hidden under her blanket, was a scrap of paper torn from the library printer. A missing dog notice. Vala's photo gleamed, healthy, strong, and beneath it, a number. Alexander Hayes's number. One call could change everything. She thought of the hungry children, the cold walls, Agnes's cruelty. $1 million could fix it all. But then she thought of Ranger's paw on her arm, his amber eyes filled with trust no money could buy. Her decision came like a whisper. Emily slipped from her bunk, her bare feet silent on the warped floorboards. Past Agnes's office, out the back door, through the fence gap. Ranger waited in the shadows, tail thumping once. Emily dropped to her knees, hugging him tight. "I can't do this without you. Don't leave me now." He licked her cheek once, pressed against her leg. "I wasn't planning to." Together, they set off. The road to town stretched long and lonely, 3 miles of cracked asphalt through whispering pines. Emily's jacket was thin, her breath misting, but she kept moving. Ranger's steady gait anchored her. By the time the glow of Cascade's gas station appeared, her legs burned. The payphone loomed outside, scarred by graffiti and rust. Emily stopped, heart racing. She pulled out her hoarded coins, pennies from sidewalks, nickels from the fountain, 2 stolen quarters, enough for 1 call. Her hands shook as she lifted the receiver. Ranger sat at her feet, eyes intent. She fed the coins into the slot, each clink a drumbeat in her chest. She dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, a weary male voice answered. "Harrison Residence." Emily's throat closed. Ranger nudged her calf. She found her voice. "My name is Emily Carter. I found your dog." Silence. Then the sound of a man trying not to cry. "Valor? Have you seen him? He's alive?" Tears blurred her vision. She looked down at Ranger, whose ears twitched at the name. "Yes, he's alive. I found him in the forest. He was hurt, but he's better now. He's the best dog." The man's voice shook. "Thank God. 3 months. I thought—" His words broke, then urgent. "Where are you? Please, tell me where you are. I'll come right away. Just don't let him go." The warning beep echoed in her ear. The call was running out. "He's safe," Emily said quickly. "I kept him safe. But someone tied him up, with boat rope, left him to die." A sharp intake of breath. Fury and grief tangled. Who would do such a thing? Emily thought of Agnes, but the words stuck. Not yet. The beep grew louder. "I have to go," she whispered. "But don't stop looking. He's waiting for you." "Wait!" the man cried. "What was your name again?" Her fingers trembled. "Emily. Emily Carter." A strangled whisper. "Carter. Did you say Carter?" But the line went dead. Emily hung up slowly, her chest heaving. Ranger gazed up at her beneath the flickering streetlight. She dropped to her knees, hugging him. "I told him," she whispered. "I told him you're alive." Ranger pressed closer, as if to say, "And now, nothing will ever be the same." That night, Alexander Hayes sat in his Portland estate, clutching a photo of a younger Sarah, radiant smile and dark hair spilling loose. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Emily, if you're real, I won't lose you too." Within the hour, his black SUV was tearing down the highway. Meanwhile, Agnes answered the orphanage phone, cigarette glowing. "This is Alexander Hayes," the voice said. "I need to speak to Emily Carter, immediately." Agnes froze, then smiled, bitter and sharp. "I'm afraid you have the wrong number." She hung up, but Hayes didn't stop. Soon he was calling the sheriff's station. "Find me Emily Carter. Her mother's name was Sarah." The pieces began to shift. In the shed, Emily clutched her mother's ring, Ranger's head heavy in her lap. "He knew her name," she whispered. "Sarah. If he knew her, if she meant something to him." Tears blurred her vision. Maybe she wasn't what Agnes said. Maybe she loved me after all. Ranger placed his paw on her knee. Amber eyes steady, certain. "You're not just a dog," Emily whispered. "You're the bridge between the lies and the truth. Maybe you were meant to find me." That night, as Ranger leaned into her and the storm eased, Emily felt something she hadn't dared before. Not certainty, not yet, but the fragile spark of hope. Her whole life, she'd been told she was unwanted, forgotten. But Hayes's voice, shocked, desperate, recognizing her name, had cracked that belief. Maybe her story wasn't over. Maybe it was only just beginning. She pressed her forehead to Ranger's, whispering, "Maybe you didn't just save me. Maybe you came to bring me home." And in that moment, she knew. Ranger wasn't just hers. He was the thread tying her to a past she'd never known, and to a future she hadn't dared to dream of. The night pressed heavy over Riverbend, a silence so deep it felt alive. Emily sat in the shed, Ranger's head across her lap, her fingers buried in his fur. Every creak of the forest made her tense. She hadn't slept since the phone call. Near midnight, the sound came. Tires on asphalt, too smooth, too heavy to be local. Ranger's ears shot up, his body tightening before Emily even rose to her feet. Through the cracked window, headlights carved through the trees. A sleek black SUV rolled into the clearing, engine humming low. It stopped, lights dimming. Emily held her breath, pressing a hand against Ranger's side. Her instincts screamed hide, but she knew who had come. The driver stepped out first, scanning the clearing with professional caution. Then the rear door opened. Alexander Hayes, taller than she expected, but bent beneath age and illness. Silver hair gleamed in the moonlight, his coat hanging loose on a frame worn thin. An oxygen tank rolled beside him, every breath audible, raspy, strained, but steady. His eyes, though, were burning, red-rimmed with exhaustion, yet lit with desperate hope. Ranger moved before Emily could stop him. With a cry that was half bark, half sob, the German shepherd surged forward, pushing through his limp as though it meant nothing. "Valor!" Hayes's voice cracked the silence. The name trembled in the air, and Ranger answered with every beat of his stride. He slowed as he reached Hayes, pressing his head into the man's chest. Hayes crumpled to his knees, arms wrapping around the dog with a sound torn from years of grief. A raw sob. "My boy," he whispered again and again. "My good boy. I thought I'd lost you forever." Ranger's tail thumped once. His body melted against Hayes, trembling with recognition. Emily's throat closed. She pressed a fist to her mouth, fighting back the sob clawing its way free. Hayes cupped Ranger's scarred face in trembling hands. "You waited," he gasped between shallow breaths. "I should have protected you. God forgive me." The driver steadied him, but Hayes shook him off. His whole being belonged to the dog before him. Emily stepped out of the shed, silhouetted in the SUV's headlights. Hayes's gaze flicked up and froze. His breath hitched audibly. His hand dropped from Ranger's fur as though struck by a ghost. "Sarah." The word escaped like a prayer. His eyes weren't on Ranger now. They were on Emily. She stiffened, her hand flying to the ring at her throat. Hayes staggered upright, swaying with the driver's support. He stared as though she were both a miracle and wounded. "Who are you?" His voice trembled. "What's your name, child?" Emily swallowed hard. Emily Carter." The name struck like a tolling bell. Hayes staggered back, gripping the SUV for balance. "Carter," he rasped. His eyes darted from her face to the ring. "Dear God." Ranger moved between them, tail sweeping once against Emily's leg, binding them together. Hayes's voice cracked. You have her face, her eyes. The same stubborn line of her mouth. Emily clutched the ring. You knew my mother? His breath hitched. Knew her. She was my world. His shoulders shook. They told me she was gone. That Sarah had... He faltered. And that there was no child. His voice broke. But here you stand. Emily shook her head, panic rising. Agnes said she jumped, that she left me, that there was nothing left. At the name, Hayes's eyes hardened. Agnes Moore. He spat it like venom. Your aunt. I should have known. He saw Sarah again. Her laughter in the rain, her fierce honesty, the nursery they painted together. Then the lies, the forged letters, the staged photographs. He had believed her family. He had grieved for nothing. You're her daughter, he whispered, trembling but sure. Emily's knees buckled. That can't be. His hand shook toward her. The ring. I gave it to Sarah. She never took it off. Emily's voice cracked. She left it with me. Hayes pressed his hand to his mouth, breaking down. I thought I'd lost you both. For 12 years I lived with that. And now... His eyes shone with tears. Now you stand here, alive. A miracle I'll thank God for every day. Emily's voice was small, trembling. Then why didn't you come? His answer was fierce. Because I didn't know. They lied. I searched, but every trail ended in silence. If I had known, Emily, I would have torn the world apart to reach you. The conviction in his voice struck deep. Against all reason, she believed him. Ranger stepped closer, bridging the gap. His head lifted to Hayes, tail wagging once, as if confirming what words could not. Hayes's trembling hand stroked his fur. You saved her, he whispered. And you saved me too. The clearing was silent, holding its breath, until footsteps shattered it. Agnes Moore emerged from the shadows, rage twisting her face. Her eyes darted from Emily to Hayes to Ranger. I knew you were hiding something, girl. And now I see why. Emily flinched, but Ranger planted himself before her, hackles bristling, a growl rising. Agnes sneered. That mutt doesn't belong to you. He's stolen property, and I'll see him put down before I let him ruin everything. Hayes straightened, leaning on the SUV. His voice, though thin, carried steel. This is over, Ms. Moore. Agnes's eyes narrowed. This is my orphanage. That child is under my guardianship. You have no right. Guardianship? Hayes's tone was ice. You starved, beaten, and robbed those children. You lined your pockets with blood money. Her face flushed. Lies. Hayes's voice sharpened. Then perhaps you'll believe your accomplice. Marcus Chen is in custody. He confessed. How you paid him to kidnap my dog. How you wanted me to suffer. Agnes faltered, fear flickering in her eyes. Ridiculous. He gave details only you could have known. Hayes cut in. Her mask cracked. Before she could recover, a new voice cut the night. Miss Moore, step away from the child. Two figures emerged from the trees, flashlights sweeping the ground. Behind them, faint red and blue lights pulsed. Department of Human Services, the woman said, badge glinting. Agnes froze, small for the first time in Emily's memory. Uniformed officers followed. Agnes Moore, You are under investigation for embezzlement, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Her lips trembled. No, you can't. You have the right to remain silent, the officer recited. Emily's knees buckled, relief flooding her chest. It was happening. The reign of fear was ending. Agnes's gaze snapped to her, venomous. This is your doing. Ungrateful brat. I should have left you at Devil's Peak with your mother. Ranger lunged forward, barking so fiercely Agnes stumbled back. His amber eyes burned with fury. Emily didn't hide. She stood straighter, Ranger at her side, Hayes behind her like a fragile but unyielding pillar. You don't control me anymore, she said, her voice trembling but clear. The social worker's voice softened. It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe. Safe. The word felt strange, but Emily clung to it. The officers dragged Agnes toward the flashing lights. Her curses rang through the night, but Emily saw her differently now. Not a tyrant, but a broken woman swallowed by her own bitterness. Hayes exhaled shakily. It's over, he murmured, though grief still shadowed his eyes. Emily pressed her face into Ranger's fur, his tail thumping steady against her side. For once, the shadows of Riverbend lifted, not victory yet, but freedom, and the first glimpse of a life where she was no longer a ghost. The long drive wound through iron gates and up a gravel path lined with towering pines. Emily pressed her forehead to the SUV window, her breath fogging the glass. Beyond stretched an estate so vast it seemed impossible, a fortress of stone and light rising from the Oregon hills. Compared to Riverbend Orphanage, it was another universe. Her stomach twisted. She didn't belong here. Ranger shifted beside her, his tail brushing her leg. Across from her, Alexander Hayes watched quietly, his hand trembling on the leather seat, the oxygen tube looping around his ears. He looked fragile, yet his eyes never left her, filled with awe and disbelief. When the SUV stopped, staff hurried forward, but Hayes waved them back. No crowds. She doesn't need that. His gaze softened. Come. There's something I want to show you. They walked endless halls of marble and mirrors, chandeliers glittering above. Emily's jacket and worn shoes felt painfully out of place. Hayes stopped at a carved wooden door, his hand lingering on the handle. I've waited 12 years to open this again. He pushed the door. Emily froze. A nursery. Painted in soft yellow, untouched by time. A crib sat in the corner, quilt folded neatly. Toys lined shelves, their colors still bright. But it was the wall of photographs that stole her breath. Her mother, Sarah, radiant and smiling, belly rounded beneath a summer dress. An ultrasound pinned beside it. Another photo of Sarah, laughing as Hayes painted the very walls, a German shepherd puppy at their feet. Emily's knees weakened. This was mine? Hayes stepped in as if into a chapel. Every brushstroke, every nail. I built this for you. I wanted you to grow in light, not coldness. His voice cracked. I thought I'd fill this room with laughter. Emily's tears blurred the photos. She thought of moldy blankets, empty plates, locked closets. And here, a cradle of love she'd never known, waiting all along. I don't belong here, she whispered. Hayes turned sharply. Don't say that. You belong here more than anyone. This was always meant to be yours. Emily hugged herself, the ring pressing cold into her palm. But it wasn't. I wasn't here. I was in Riverbend. Forgotten. His face collapsed into grief. He lowered himself into the rocking chair, voice quiet. I can't give back those years. God knows if I could, I would burn the world to rewrite them. Emily's voice broke. If you loved her, if you loved me, why didn't you find me? The words hit like a blade. Hayes bowed his head. Because I was lied to. Her parents told me she'd left. Then they told me you both had died. I believed them, because the truth, that I had failed you, was too unbearable. Emily's chest split with ache. For so long she had believed she was unwanted. And now she stood in a room made for her, hearing words she had longed for and feared. I don't know how to be a daughter, she whispered. Hayes lifted his gaze, eyes luminous. And I don't know how to be a father. But maybe we can learn together. Emily took a step inside. Ranger brushed her hand with his muzzle, steadying her. She stood before a photo of Sarah, glowing, alive. For the first time, she let herself believe. Maybe she had not been forgotten. But with the warmth came a shadow. If this was true, then Agnes's story about Devil's Peak was a lie, and lies, Emily knew, always had sharp teeth. She pressed the ring into her palm. I have to know, she whispered. Whispering Pines. The name promised peace, but the building sagging against the Oregon hills was nothing but neglect. Beige walls stained by rain, barred windows, air heavy with disinfectant. Emily's chest tightened as Hayes insisted on walking, leaning on his oxygen tank. Ranger stayed pressed to her side, his ears twitching uneasily. Inside, the halls stretched long and sterile. A nurse with tired eyes led them through. She's in the courtyard, she said softly. She hasn't spoken in years. Not since her sister stopped visiting. Agnes. Emily's throat tightened. They stepped outside. The courtyard was small, the fountain chipped and cloudy. Patients sat scattered, eyes vacant. And there, on a bench by the fountain, sat a woman, thin to frailty, hair streaked gray, face lined far beyond her years. Her hands rested still in her lap. Her hazel eyes stared at nothing. Emily's breath caught. That's her, Hayes whispered, his voice breaking. That's Sarah. Emily's knees wobbled. This silent, broken figure, this was her mother, the woman whose absence had carved her life into emptiness. Hayes stepped forward, his voice raw. Sarah, it's me. William. No reaction. Emily forced her feet forward, Ranger shadowing her. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. Her mother's cheekbones, her nose, her tilted head, but the eyes were hollow. Mom? The word cracked from Emily's throat. Nothing. She clutched the ring until it bit her palm. Say something, please. Hayes sank into a chair beside her. Sarah, he whispered urgently. She's here. Our daughter. Alive. Right in front of you. Still silent. Emily's tears blurred her vision. She reached out, but before she could touch, Ranger moved. He approached Sarah with reverence, sniffed her trembling hands, then placed his paw gently on her knee. Sarah blinked. Her lips trembled. A sound came, broken but real. Guardian, Hayes gasped. Emily's tears spilled over. Sarah's eyes flickered, searching. Slowly, uncertainly, she looked at Emily. Her trembling hand lifted, brushing the girl's cheek. My baby, she whispered. Emily's sob tore loose. She clutched her mother's hand. "Yes, it's me. I'm Emily. They lied to us." Agnes lied. Sarah shuddered at the name, curling inward. "She told me you were dead. She told me William had abandoned me." Hayes's voice cracked. "Never. I searched. They told me you were gone, but I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Recognition spread slowly across Sarah's face. Not the young man she had loved, but the weary figure before her. The same grey eyes that had once promised her the world. "William," she breathed. His tears fell freely. "Yes, it's me, and she's ours. Our Emily." Something broke open inside Sarah. 7 years of silence crumbled. She sobbed, clutching Emily to her frail chest, reaching for Hayes with her other hand. For a moment, they were tangled together, broken, weeping, but no longer alone. Ranger pressed against them, tail sweeping once, as if to say, "I've done my part. You're together again." Emily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, inhaling the faint antiseptic, the fragile warmth. "I thought I wasn't enough," she cried. Sarah clutched her tighter. "Never. You were everything. I was broken, but I never stopped loving you, not for a second." Hayes bent closer, tears streaming. "We've all been broken, but we're here now. That's what matters." The fountain trickled softly, like a blessing. Sarah's gaze, clear for the first time in years, moved between Emily, Hayes, and finally Ranger. She buried her trembling fingers in the shepherd's fur. Her voice shook, but it carried. "Guardian's blood never gave up. He brought me back to my family." Emily pressed closer, Hayes gripping both their hands. They stayed that way, tears falling into the courtyard stone. A family stitched back together by loss and love, and by a dog who refused to let them stay lost. As the sun slipped behind the walls, painting the sky in fading gold, Emily realized this was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The drive back from Whispering Pines was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed on the chest. Emily sat by the window, her small hand tangled with Sarah's fragile fingers, Ranger leaning steady against her legs. Across from them, William Hayes sat pale and exhausted, the hiss of his oxygen tank filling the space. His eyes never left Sarah, drinking in every second as if it might vanish. When the mansion came into view, stone walls glowing beneath the floodlights, Sarah's grip tightened. Her shoulders stiffened. "I can't," she whispered. Hayes leaned forward. "Sarah." Her head shook violently, panic sparking. "I can't walk through those doors. That house. It belongs to the life I destroyed." The SUV slowed. Windows reflected the towering oak doors, the marble steps rising like judgment. Sarah stared at them as though they were a tomb. "I don't belong here," she said, trembling. "I left you both. I chose to fall. You built this world without me." Emily's voice cut through, small but fierce. "You didn't leave me. Agnes took you. She built those lies. What matters is, you're here now." Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. "I can't pretend to be the woman I was. I'm broken." Emily placed her palms on her mother's face. "Then don't go in as who you were. Go in as who you are now. Broken, scared, still my mom. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to try." Hayes's voice trembled. "This house isn't a monument to what we lost. It's a place waiting to be rebuilt. For Emily. For us." Ranger stepped forward, brushing against Sarah's leg, a low whine vibrating from his chest. The sound cracked something open in her. Her knees shook, but she let Emily guide one hand and Hayes hold the other. Together they climbed the steps. At the top, Sarah froze at her reflection in the glossy wood. A gaunt woman flanked by a child and an old man. Not the family she once imagined, but a family nonetheless. Emily whispered, "We'll try. Together." Sarah nodded, tears slipping free. And for the first time in 12 years, she stepped through the doors of the home that had once been hers. Ranger's paws clicked on the marble behind them, steady, certain, as if to remind them all they were home. That night, the mansion was quiet, wrapped in an uneasy peace. Emily curled beneath heavy blankets in a soft, yellow room. Ranger sprawled at her feet. Down the hall, Hayes sat reading in his study, lamplight pooling across old papers. Sarah lingered at a window, fingers pressed to the glass as though still unsure she belonged inside. Then, the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights swung wild across the lawn. Sarah's breath caught. Before she could move, the front doors burst open. "Sarah!" Hayes's voice cracked with alarm. A figure stumbled inside. Marcus Chen, wild-eyed, jacket torn, a gun trembling in his hand. His voice was a snarl. "You ruined me, Hayes, put me in chains and left me to rot, but I don't go down easy." Hayes struggled to his feet, cane slipping. "Chen, don't—" "Shut up!" Marcus waved the gun, his hands shaking but deadly. Upstairs, Emily jolted awake. Ranger growled low, leaping from the bed to plant himself in front of her. Marcus climbed the staircase, dragging himself up with one hand, the gun aimed with the other. His gaze found Emily at the landing. "There you are, the little girl who cost me everything." Ranger barked, explosive in the narrow hall, and lunged. The gun fired. The bullet shattered a vase, porcelain exploding across the floor. Emily screamed, but Ranger didn't stop. He slammed into Chen, jaws snapping around his wrist. The gun clattered away. Sarah was already moving. Instinct, long buried, drove her to her daughter's side. She threw her arms around Emily, pressing the girl's face into her chest. "Don't look, I've got you." Hayes's voice shouted down the hall, calling for help, alarms blaring as security systems roared awake. Marcus thrashed, rage twisting his features. He grabbed for the gun again, lifting it toward Sarah and Emily. "I'll take what matters most," he screamed. Time slowed. Ranger lunged once more, body colliding with Chen's arm just as the trigger pulled. The shot buried itself in the wall inches from Sarah's head. Sarah's scream tore through the mansion. Hayes staggered forward, horror carved into his face. But Ranger didn't let go. His jaws clamped harder, twisting until Chen howled, the weapon falling uselessly to the floor. With a surge of power, the shepherd drove him backward down the last steps. Chen crashed, pinned under 90 pounds of fury. Sirens wailed closer. Red and blue lights flared against the windows. Emily lifted her head from her mother's chest, tears streaking her face. She looked at Ranger standing guard, his amber eyes blazing. "Good boy," she whispered. Sarah held her tighter, tears flooding her own eyes. For years, she had believed herself too broken to protect her child. But in this moment, her arms around Emily, Ranger holding the line, she realized she had chosen differently. She hadn't frozen. She had fought. Her daughter was safe. Police stormed in moments later, dragging Marcus Chen out in cuffs. Ranger only released him when Emily touched his shoulder, her quiet voice calming him. Hayes reached the landing, his chest heaving, tears cutting down his lined face. He looked at Sarah. Emily clutched in her arms, and Ranger with blood still glistening on his muzzle. In a voice cracked by relief, he said, "We're still here. Together." Emily pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, whispering, "He saved us. But so did you, Mom." Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, she believed she could be a mother again. Later, the chaos ebbed into silence. The mansion bore scars, shattered glass, bullet holes, blood smears, but within it, something fragile had survived. Emily curled on a velvet sofa, Ranger pressed against her knees, amber eyes still scanning. Sarah sat hunched forward, trembling, her hands covering her face. Hayes leaned back in his chair, drained, the hiss of his oxygen tank steady. Yet in his eyes was a fire of gratitude. Slowly, he pulled a small wooden box from his pocket. Its edges were worn smooth from years of being carried. He stared at it as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Sarah," he said softly. She lifted her head, eyes swollen from tears. "I've carried this for 12 years. I thought I'd never have the chance to give it to you." He opened the box. Inside lay a silver ring set with 3 stones: emerald, sapphire, diamond. They glimmered softly in the lamplight. Sarah's lips parted. "Our birthstones." Hayes nodded, his voice rough. "I bought it the day before Japan. I wanted to ask again, properly this time. Make us a real family. But lies stole everything. I've lived every day since knowing what I lost." He lifted the ring, his hand trembling. "I don't know how much time I have left, but if you'll let me, I want to spend it not as a man consumed by regret, but as the man who never stopped loving you." Sarah shook her head, tears spilling. "I'm not the woman you loved. I'm broken." Hayes leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Then let me love the broken pieces. They're still you." Silence stretched, heavy and holy. Emily pressed her face into Ranger's fur, her heart twisting. Then softly she spoke. "We're broken," she said, her voice carrying more strength than her years. "But we're together, and that's what matters." Sarah's tears fell freely. She took the ring, sliding it onto her right hand, not as marriage, but as a promise, a vow that even broken things could still shine. Hayes's breath shuddered out, relief loosening the lines of his face. Emily crawled between them, one hand gripping Sarah's, the other Hayes's frail fingers. Ranger shifted forward, placing his paw across all 3 hands, binding them together. They stayed like that, bruised, battered, but alive. Not perfect, not healed, but together. Outside, storm clouds parted. Moonlight spilled through tall windows, touching silver, tears, and the steady amber of Ranger's eyes. And in that light, a family, fragile, imperfect, but real, finally began to take shape. The rain hadn't stopped when the knock came. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the Hayes mansion door. Ranger lifted his head from Emily's lap, a low growl vibrating through her hand. Emily stiffened. Only hours earlier, Marcus Chen had stormed through these same doors with a gun. The memory still pulsed hot in her chest. Hayes rose with his cane. No one should be here at this hour. But Emily was already moving, drawn by something she couldn't name. She slid the chain lock and peered through the crack. A woman stood on the porch, drenched. Auburn hair streaked with gray clung to her face. Her eyes, haunted, familiar, searched the doorway with desperate urgency. "I'm looking for William Hayes," she said, her voice raw. Then her gaze dropped to Emily, her breath caught. "And you? God, you must be—" Ranger pressed against Emily, hackles lifted. But the woman didn't advance. Instead, she dropped to her knees in the rain. "My name is Emma Sullivan. I'm Agnes's daughter." The words hit like cold water. Emily stumbled back. "You're supposed to be dead." Emma shook her head, tears mingling with rain. "That's what my mother wanted you to believe, but I survived." Hayes appeared in the hall, eyes widening as recognition dawned. "Emma Sullivan," he whispered. "You were taken." Her voice broke. 30 years ago. It wasn't random. It was a trafficking ring, the same one Marcus Chen worked for. "I was one of their children." Emily's chest hollowed. Marcus's threats, the gun pointed at her mother. Suddenly they were part of something larger. Emma's hands shook. "I escaped at 18. I've been running ever since, under different names. When I found Agnes, she shut the door in my face, said she had no daughter. She carried her guilt like a stone and buried me with it." Hayes's jaw tightened. "She knew." Emma's voice cracked. She knew, but she couldn't face the truth. And now, Chen's arrest won't stop them. He was only one link in a chain that's been operating for decades. They've already circled your family once. They won't stop. Her gaze shifted to Emily, fierce and sorrowful. "You would have been the perfect target. A hidden heir, exposed. They were coming for you." The study seemed to shrink, shadows thick against the firelight. "Why now?" Hayes asked quietly. Emma's reply was steady. "Because I can help you fight them. I know their patterns, their names, their cities. If you want to protect Emily, if you want to end this, you'll need me." Silence stretched. Finally, Emily stepped forward. Ranger pressed against her leg. "Then stay," she said softly. "Don't run anymore. Help us stop them." Emma's lips trembled, hope flickering through the ruin of her face. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay." Ranger moved then, placing his paw gently on her knee. Emma froze, startled by the weight of his gaze. It felt like judgment and acceptance. For the first time in 30 years, Emma Sullivan felt she belonged somewhere. By morning, the mansion had become a fortress. Gray mist curled over the lawns, but inside the study, tension pressed heavier than fog. Sarah stood silent at the window. Hayes sat by the fire, his oxygen hissing. Emily knelt on the rug, Ranger at her side. Emma waited near the desk, pale but resolute. The knock this time was brisk, official. 2 figures in dark suits entered, badges flashing. "FBI. I'm Special Agent Monroe. This is Agent Patel. We're here about Marcus Chen and the syndicate tied to him." They spread files across Hayes's desk, photographs, maps, faces of missing children. Emily's stomach turned as she saw eyes that could have belonged to the kids of Riverbend. Monroe's voice was calm but sharp. "This syndicate has operated for decades. They target children linked to wealth or influence. Ransom is one angle, but if ransom fails—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth. Emily's grip on Ranger's fur tightened until her knuckles whitened. Patel continued. "Valor, your dog, wasn't stolen for money. He was bait. His abduction was meant to destabilize Mr. Hayes, lure him into the open, create chaos." Hayes's voice roughened. "Lure him for what?" Monroe's gaze flicked to Emily. Her. The word cut like glass. Emily felt her blood drain. "You," Patel said gently. "The hidden daughter of Alexander Hayes. If Valor hadn't survived long enough for Emily to find him, she would have been their prize. Emily buried her face in Ranger's neck, the dog's steady warmth holding her together. So, all this time, I wasn't nothing. I was prey. Hayes wheeled closer, his hand trembling as it reached for hers. No, Emily, you're my daughter, and now you're not alone. Ranger pressed against her, amber eyes fierce, but Monroe's tone grew harder. This won't stop on its own. Chen failed. That means the syndicate will send others. The only way to end this is to draw them out. Hayes's eyes narrowed. And how do you propose that? Monroe didn't hesitate. With valor. The room froze. Emily shot up, her voice sharp. No, he's not bait. He's not a trap. Patel crouched to meet her gaze. Emily, they already wanted him. He's their unfinished business. If we make it look like he's vulnerable again, they'll surface. And when they do, we take them down. Emily shook her head, clutching Ranger. You don't understand. They tied him to die once. They'll kill him if they get another chance. Ranger's ears flicked. He didn't growl. He only watched her with steady eyes, calm as stone. Hayes's voice cracked with fury. You're asking us to risk the one who saved her life. Do you know what you're asking? Monroe's reply was firm. Full surveillance. Federal teams at every exit. He'll never be alone. But without bait, they vanish underground. And then, no child is safe. The fire popped sharply. Sarah turned from the window, her face drawn but determined. They took 30 years from Emma. They nearly took Emily. If we don't stop them, how many more will they take? Emma's jaw set, her voice low. She's right. This isn't about one family anymore. It's about ending the cycle. Emily's voice cracked. Why does it always have to be him? Why can't they take me? Hayes's voice thundered despite its frailty. Don't you ever say that. You've suffered enough. Emily sobbed, burying her face in Ranger's fur. He's already hurt. If they... She couldn't finish. Then, Ranger moved. Deliberately, he pulled from her arms and faced her. His amber eyes locked on hers, unwavering. And slowly, he lifted his paw and set it on her arm. The same vow he had given her in the shed. The same vow he had given Sarah at the fountain. Emily broke. No, she whispered. Don't you dare tell me you want this. But Ranger's paw pressed down, his tail thumping once against the rug. It was his choice. The room seemed to stop breathing. Even the agents were silent, watching a dog speak in the only way he could. Emily clutched his paw with both hands, tears streaming. I saved you. You're mine. You're supposed to stay. Hayes wheeled closer, his frail hand on her shoulder. Sometimes love means letting the ones we cherish be brave. Look at him, Emily. He isn't afraid. Her chest ached. She pressed her forehead to Ranger's, whispering through her sobs. If you're brave enough, then I'll be brave too. But you come back. You come back to me. Ranger licked the salt of her tears, sealing his vow. Monroe's voice, softer now. We'll set the trap on our terms. With Valor's help, we'll end this. Emily wiped her face, her voice steadier. Then I'll be there. He won't face it alone. Hayes closed his eyes, pain and pride etched deep. Neither will I. Sarah crossed the room, resting a trembling hand on Emily's other shoulder. We all stand together. That's the only way we win. Ranger settled beside Emily, his paw still resting on her arm, tail thumping once more. Slow, resolute. And in that moment, the message was clear. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was love strong enough to walk into danger, not for yourself, but for those who couldn't fight alone. The night air was thick with anticipation, the kind that made even the Oregon pines seem to hold their breath. A temporary command post glowed near the abandoned rail yard, radios humming, agents murmuring in clipped tones. Emily sat in the back of the surveillance van, her hands clenched in her lap, Ranger pressed against her legs. He wore a tactical vest now, bold letters, Police K9, gleaming in the dim light. The irony stung. Once left tied to a tree to die, he was now the centerpiece of a plan meant to end decades of darkness. Across from her, William Hayes sat pale beneath the fluorescent light, his oxygen tube hissing softly. His cane trembled in his grip, but his gray eyes, her eyes, were steady. "This has to work," he rasped. "It ends tonight, or it never ends." Sarah placed her hand over his, fragile but firm. "It will," she whispered, though her gaze flicked to Emily, full of unspoken fear. Special Agent Monroe leaned in, headset crackling. "It's time." The stage is set. Valor leads. We follow. Emily pressed her forehead to Ranger's, her voice breaking into a whisper. "You have to come back. Promise me." Ranger's tail thumped once against the van floor, solemn as an oath. The rail yard loomed like a graveyard of steel, rusting cars casting long shadows under the halogen floodlights. Emily and Ranger stepped into the night first, two plainclothes agents flanking them at a distance. The crunch of gravel under her sneakers seemed too loud. Ranger moved at her side, muscles taut, ears twitching. A voice came from the shadows, smooth, male. "Well, well." The girl and the dog. Figures emerged. 6, 7, maybe more. Hard-eyed men, predators who'd done this before. One held an empty leash in his gloved hand, mocking what they had once done to Ranger. "Bring him here," the leader said. "We've been waiting." Emily's knees trembled, but Ranger shifted sideways, deliberately stepping into the open. His amber eyes glowed under the lights. Monroe's voice snapped through the radios. "Now!" The yard exploded in controlled chaos. Floodlights ignited, sirens wailed, and agents surged from the shadows. "FBI! On the ground!" The syndicate scrambled, some reaching for weapons, others bolting for escape. But the perimeter was sealed. Dogs barked from the outer line, agents swarmed with precision. One man ran. Ranger lunged, slamming him into the gravel, his growl rolling like thunder, until agents cuffed the suspect. Emily stood frozen, heart hammering, as Ranger moved with terrifying focus, never reckless, always precise, herding men into the FBI's trap. It was as if he had been waiting for this night, for this purpose. Within minutes, the yard was filled with curses, swallowed by the click of zip ties. 7 men, leaders, predators, were dragged into armored vans. Monroe strode past, jaw tight. "That's the spine of the operation." "They won't recover." Emily sank to her knees, clutching Ranger. His chest heaved from exertion, his eyes burned bright, triumphant. "You did it," she whispered, tears streaking her face. "You really did it." Behind her, Hayes staggered, his cane slipping. Sarah caught him. "William!" Agents rushed forward, but Hayes lifted a trembling hand, his voice thin but fierce. "I'm all right. Just the weight of it." His eyes fixed on Emily and Ranger, glistening with pride. "I had to see this. Justice." Emily grabbed his hand, her voice urgent. "Don't you leave now. You promised." Hayes smiled weakly. "Not until I've seen every piece of this family safe." As dawn broke over the yard, Emily sat between Ranger and Hayes, Sarah's arms around them both. The syndicate was shattered, and for the first time, Emily believed it. They weren't running anymore. They were winning. The Riverbend orphanage no longer existed. In its place stood the Hayes Family Center, a place where forgotten children and abandoned dogs rebuilt each other. Wide windows let in Oregon's endless green light, and laughter replaced silence. The smell of fresh bread and pine shavings filled the halls where mildew and hunger once reigned. Emily Hayes stood taller now, 17, her dark hair tied neatly back, her shoulders squared. Her eyes carried the weight of the girl she had once been, but also the steady resolve of someone who had fought her way to hope. Beside her, Ranger walked slower now, his muzzle silvered, his joints stiffened by age. Yet his presence was undiminished. Children raced past him in the courtyard, tossing balls, tugging ropes. He joined them still, tail wagging with dignity, each child sensing the safety in his shadow. The center thrived on a simple truth. Broken things heal best together. Each child paired with a dog, each pair learning to trust. Emily often watched from the balcony, wide-eyed boys teaching patience to trembling rescues, small girls brushing matted coats with the tenderness they'd once longed for themselves. One autumn afternoon, the center's courtyard buzzed with anticipation. A heavy cloth veiled the newest addition, a bronze statue. Emily stepped forward before the crowd. Children, families, supporters, her voice carrying steady. 5 years ago, this place was a prison. We were hungry, unwanted, forgotten. But then came a dog, broken, tied to a tree, and a girl just as broken. Together, we found each other. And that changed everything. The children clapped, some cheering Ranger's name. Emily's voice trembled with emotion. "Ranger taught me loyalty isn't about words. It's about staying, even when the world falls apart. He stood beside me when no one else did. Today, we honor him not just as a hero, but as family." 2 boys tugged the ropes, and the cloth fell. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The bronze gleamed. Ranger in his prime, proud, head high, paw extended toward the ground. Cast into the base was a small girl's hand, resting in his, a bond eternal. The children surged forward, touching the statue's paw as if it carried magic. Emily knelt beside the real Ranger, who watched with calm dignity. Leaning close, she whispered, "We did it together." His ears flicked, his tail thumped once, then again. Tears blurred her vision, but these weren't the tears of the starving girl she once was. They were tears of gratitude, of awe. She pressed her forehead to his, feeling the warmth of his breath, the steady rhythm of his heart. "Your mission's complete, old friend. But your story, it'll live forever here." Above them, the statue shone in the autumn light, sentinel and promise. No child, no dog, would ever be forgotten again. And beneath it, a girl and her dog remained, once broken, but never again. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories are not about power or riches, but about love, the kind you find in the steady eyes of a German shepherd who refuses to leave your side. Their loyalty runs deeper than words, and the bond between a person and their dog can carry us through hunger, grief, and even silence. Ranger's journey reminds us that animals are not just companions. They are family, guardians of our hearts, and keepers of hope. If this story touched you, maybe it's time to lean a little closer to your own dog. Listen to the quiet ways they speak. Notice the lessons in their patience and loyalty. I've found a resource that shares gentle ways to strengthen that bond, and I'll leave the link here in case you'd like to explore it. It's nothing fancy, just something I thought might bring you closer to the friend who already gives you so much. Take your time with it. No rush. And maybe tonight, when your dog curls up at your feet, you'll feel what Emily felt. That sometimes love shows up on four legs, and it changes everything.